Hello everybody. I'd like to do this vlog about traveling overseas when I was in the United States Air Force. I was stationed at Oxnard Air Force Base in California, and it was November of '64, and I received a telephone call from personnel to inform me that I had been chosen for an overseas assignment. It would be my first overseas assignment, and I was on my second enlistment in the United States Air Force. And now I'm going to call Kennedy Airport Idlewild because I don't know if the name had been changed. When I was in Oxnard Air Force Base, I was there, and I think I don't believe they had changed the name of Idlewild to Kennedy, so I'm just going to say Idlewild. So I came home from California on leave. We left in November, and I was to report and why. Now, in this story, I'm just going to tell you the occurrence, and I have no idea of why it occurred the way it did. But I was to report at Karamursel, Turkey, before Christmas of '64. So I flew from Knoxville. We landed in Newark, New Jersey. I think it was Delta. But when I got on the airplane, the gentleman that was sitting beside him, of course he was older than me at the time, that was sitting beside of me was dressed real nice, and he introduced himself as an official with the Tennessee Valley Authority, and he was on his way to New York for a conference or something. And he asked me, he said, where are you going? I said, well, I'm in the Air Force, and I've been assigned to Turkey. He said, when's your flight leave New York? And I said, well, it leaves tomorrow evening, I think at 7 o'clock. And I always like to travel ahead of time because I was always afraid that I would be late. So I just don't like to be late for anything. So I went up a day early. And he said, where are you staying? And I told him, I said, I'm going out to the airport and I'm just going to hang around there in the lounge until my flight leaves. And he said, I've got a hotel rented, a room. He said, you're welcome to stay with me. And I mean, the guy was legit, and I told him, I said, sure, that'd be great if you don't mind. He said, no. So when we landed in Newark, New Jersey, he knew his way around. We got a taxi, went into New York City, and we stayed at a hotel about a block from Times Square. And he said, would you like to go see a movie at Radio City Music Hall? And I said, yes, I would. So we went there. He paid the admission, and I mean, he acted like he knew his way around, and here I was. I'd never been in New York City before. And I mean, why all this came together is a mystery to me. And it was in December, and the Rockettes were doing their Christmas program. And so we saw the Rockettes, saw the movie, and we stayed in there and saw the Rockettes do their performance again, and then we left. The next morning, he said, I'll take you to the bus terminal. He said, I'll get a taxi and we'll go to the bus terminal where you need to go. And he said, that'll take you out to Idlewild. So he dropped me off at the bus terminal, and not long after that I got a bus out to Idlewild and went into the airport lounge there for Pan American. And I must have gotten there 9 or 10 o'clock, so I had to wait around until 7 that evening. But if I hadn't have met this guy, I would have had to spend a day out there, you know, just hanging around at the airport. And that's what I had planned to do. So, and Pan American had around the world Flight 1 and Flight 2. It went around the world one direction and came back the other direction. The one I was on was, I think, Flight 1 that went through Europe. And I think they kind of had different routes. One went through Rome, but the one that I was on was going through Vienna, Austria. So anyway, we took off at about 7 o'clock and flew to Heathrow in London and landed there. It was still dark, and I guess we didn't clear customs. We just came into the duty-free shop there and hung around till they serviced the airplane. And when we left there, when we left Heathrow, it was daylight. And as I flew across the English Channel, I thought about the guys in the Second World War that would fly across the Channel in a B-17 with going into France, where ME-109s and ME-190s would be shooting at them. And I thought, here I sat in the comfort of a 707. Our next stop was Frankfurt, Germany, and I don't know if we were catching up with a weather front or if a weather front caught up with us. But when we landed in Frankfurt, Germany, it started to snow. Let me check, make sure my... I coordinate my digital recorder with my video camera, and sometimes I forget to turn one or the other on, and I'll talk for 20 minutes and it's not captured. That's an age thing. So anyway, the weather, we either caught up with weather or the weather caught up with us when we landed in Frankfurt. So when we left, we took on some passengers in Frankfurt. So when we left Frankfurt, our next stop was in Vienna, Austria. And we had a number of people on there going to Vienna. The reason I'm looking there, I see someone came to that house over there. I don't know if they belong there or not. But anyway, we had people on there coming from London, New York, and Frankfurt going to Vienna, Austria. Not long after we took off, we were up above the weather, and the pilot came on and he said, due to inclement weather, we won't be able to land in Austria. The itinerary, the route of that airplane was Istanbul, Beirut, Lebanon. And he said, due to inclement weather in Vienna, we can't land there, and we don't have enough fuel to go to Beirut, and we can't go into Istanbul on account of weather, so we're going to try to go into Ankara. I had a map of where Pan American flew, and I took the map and took my handkerchief until I could make an arc, and I was thinking, well, I was guessing where we were at between Frankfurt and Vienna. And I was thinking, if we can't land in Vienna, how in the world are we going to make it to Beirut? And when the pilot made the announcement, all those folks that were going to Vienna, Austria, they sure didn't want to go to Turkey. So they were unhappy campers. So the flight continued, and I was thinking, this thing's going to run out of fuel, and we're going to wind up in the sea or on one of those mountaintops in Turkey. And eventually I guess we outran the front. Well, I know we did. And you could look down and see some of the rugged parts of Turkey. Snow, you could see snow everywhere. And I could tell that the flight was losing altitude. So I determined that we were getting ready to land in Ankara. So we landed in Ankara, and the weather was clear. And we cleared customs in Ankara. And I don't know how it is now, but when I went to Turkey, you couldn't fly on a foreign flag carrier inside of Turkey. So we had cleared customs, and if we were going to go back to Istanbul, we either had to go by bus or take Turkish Airlines back. So the Pan Am had a representative there, and I walked in the terminal, and where the guy came from, I have no earthly idea, but this guy in civilian clothes walked up, and he said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Karamursel. And he said, well, I'm going there too, and he introduced himself as a tech sergeant. Of course, we were out of uniform. So I thought, well, they're going to put us up for the night, because they had the people that were going to Austria. They were telling them that they'd already gotten them a hotel room down in Ankara, that they were going to stay there. This is going to be a long video, but when you're telling war stories, you know, I'm not going to worry about the time. If you're uninterested, I understand if you don't want to listen to this. But anyway, they took those folks that were going to Vienna down to Ankara, and I was planning on going with them, you know, and so I asked this Pan Am rep, who was a Turk. He said, no, he said, we've got you all booked out on a Turkish Airliner in 45 minutes going to Istanbul. And I said, well, if Pan Am can't land in Istanbul, how are you going to land? He said, the weather's bad, but he said, we fly into Istanbul when other people won't. Well, by this time I was starting to get concerned, but this tech sergeant that was going to Karamursel had approached me. So they booked us on Turkish Airlines. It was a Fokker F-27. I think Pan Am used to, not Pan Am, but Delta used to fly them on short hauls. It was a turboprop, a high-wing turboprop. And if you want to know what the aircraft looks like, the Army Golden Knights, I don't know if they still do, they used to jump from that, the Army had one of them. It's a great airplane. So, and by this time, there were two dependents that were going to Istanbul. Their husbands were waiting on them, and one of them sat with the tech sergeant and one sat with me. And they were absolutely petrified. When we walked out to get on the Turkish Airliner, the weather started to catch up with us, and the wind was blowing, it was snowing, sleeting, and we got on the airplane and it was packed. And to my knowledge, we were the only 4 Americans on the airplane. So they taxied out to the end of the runway, and I could see the rain. He took off, and no more than we broke ground, we were in weather. You couldn't see anything. And the door to the cabin, the pilot's cabin, I guess the latch was broken. So when he would hit a terminal, the door would go slam. And I could see the pilot and co-pilot. I don't think they had a navigator on that airplane. They could have. If they did, I don't remember seeing him. So we were going to Istanbul. And we were going into the weather because we were going into it rather than away from it. So I could tell that we were getting ready to land in Istanbul because the aircrafts, the Turkish Airliner, started to descend in altitude, and we were back in the weather. You couldn't see anything. And it was starting to get dark. And the pilot kept flashing the lights out there on the wing. I don't know if he was looking for icing or what. And on that high wing airplane, I was sitting right under the wing, and the gear came out from under the pod that the engines were on. And so I saw the flaps come down, and I saw the gear come down. So I knew we were about to land, and I had and these two dependents that were on that airplane. I mean, they were I was scared myself, but they were petrified. So I kept looking out the window trying to see the perimeter fence as we came over it. Now I'm going to exaggerate, but this is the way it seemed to me. The first thing I saw over in Istanbul, around the airport, most of the street lights were amber. So the first thing I saw is we went over the perimeter fence, across a highway, and we just zipped right across the perimeter fence, and I could see these amber lights. And I thought, this airplane's sideways. He's not going straight, he's going sideways. How he landed that airplane, to me, to this day, is a mystery. He straightened it up just before he hit the runway, but I know we were flying sideways. And we taxied into the terminal there in Istanbul, and the two dependents, their husbands were there to meet them, and you could tell that they were, I never seen people so glad to see each other in my life as those guys did their wives. We started to get off the airplane, and I told this tech sergeant, I said, let's kind of delay it a minute. I want to congratulate that pilot. He said, okay. So everybody scurried off the airplane, and this guy came out of the left-hand seat, which I assumed he was the captain. And he was an old guy. Looked like he needed a haircut. Looked like he hadn't shaved in 3 days. He come waddling out there, and I said, excuse me. I said, you know, I want to congratulate you. I said, I didn't think you was going to land this airplane. And in perfect English, he said, oh, thank you. He said, I've been in plenty of situations like that. He said, it was a piece of cake. So anyway, the weather was so bad. We were stranded in Istanbul for 3 days. I got a room at the Hilton Hotel in Istanbul, and the Turks, the tech sergeant that I was with, he could speak, well, to me, he was speaking fluent Turkish. But we were checking in, and he was having a little bit of trouble getting the guy to understand. And the Turk finally said, would you please speak English? He said, we speak English here. So communicating was not a problem because everybody spoke English. But we were stranded there for 3 days before we could get a ferry boat to a village called Yalova. it was spelt, excuse me, I'm Belgian. It was spelt Y-A-L-O-V-A. And that's where the ferry boat landed. But when we got on the ferry boat to leave Istanbul, it was still, the weather was still real bad, and you could see fog across that's the Golden Horn there, where the ferry boats came into Istanbul. And we were going out through the Bosporus into the Sea of Marmara. But the ferry boat started to slow down, and he was just creeping along, and I figured, well, you know, the weather's so bad that he's probably, you know, purposely trying to prevent running into something. And I was looking, and all of a sudden I saw these ships, these warships, and what it was, the Turkish Navy was anchored, and he was weaving himself through the Turkish Navy. So when we got through that, he increased the power, and we started increasing our speed again. And when we landed in, when the ferry boat came into Yalova, it was the first time I'd ever seen a Mercedes bus. And so we got on these Mercedes buses and started toward Karamursel. I looked around. The tech sergeant was nowhere to be found, and I never saw him again. I don't know. I never saw him anymore. So the bus pulled into the main gate at Karamursel, and I got off and walked on the base, and I was there for 18 months, and I left in June of 1966. And I would go into, I'll do another, if you're interested, I'll do a vlog about my duty at Karamursel. And that base no longer exists. The command that I was in, I can tell you that. I was in the United States Air Force Security Service. It was formed in 1948. I think it was disbanded in '79. So it no longer exists. But I'll tell you about my duty at Karamursel in another vlog. Well, I know this was long. Let's see how long it was. Looks like 24 minutes, or maybe longer than that. About 24 minutes. Well, thank you very much for listening, and I'll try to do a vlog about my service at Karamursel. We'll see you. Bye-bye.